From rock and roll musician to Hollywood's film and television industry. From drug addiction to homelessness to spiritual awakening in the wilderness. This is my backstory and my life of extraordinary, otherworldly experiences. Hi, my name is Sky Cheyenne, and welcome back once again to Rebuild Reality, where, of course, as always, we talk about who we really are, why we're here, and how all of this stuff works. Obviously, today it's going to be just a little bit different because we're going to be talking about me. Well, I've had a number of people ask me, well, what's your experiences? How do you know what you know? And rightfully so, like, who am I? Why am I up here, yammering away and stuff? Why do I know the things that I know? What qualifies me to be up here? And I've always felt really personally strong about that because I've seen so many people, and it always was like this little thing that used to bother me, where I was like, well, you just took a course in it. You just read a book about it, and now you're teaching other people. To me, it has to be your personal experience. In order to talk the talk, you have to have walked the walk. Otherwise, I don't think that people, it's like you can't hold the bicycle seat for other people if you haven't been there yourself. It's the same thing like flying an airplane. Well, you can read a book on it, you can take a course on it, but I still ain't getting on that plane with you until you've actually had some experience. Otherwise, you don't really know what you're doing, and we're on shaky ground, right? So, there's been so many times in the past where I could have come forward, where I chose not to, because I wanted to wait until I knew that I knew what was really going on here, that I truly, really understood this program, this matrix, this reality, whatever you want to call it, before I knew that I was qualified for my morals, from where I come from, before I was going to tell anybody anything. Because otherwise I'm like, well, if I don't actually know, I don't really know what's going on here, what this is all about, well, then I'm just leading people down, down the trail that I don't even know where it goes to or where it comes from. So authenticity has always been a really strong thing for me, and that's why I've waited so long, so many decades, to come forward here before I even made Rebuild Reality. But let's go ahead and let's get into this, all right? So let's start with one of the bigger things that has happened to me in my life, and that's my near-death experience. And this happened a while ago. But like I mentioned in the very beginning, rock and roll, Hollywood, right? That was me. In fact, I've been a rock and roll musician pretty much most of my entire life, playing bass, guitar, drums, singing, all of that stuff. And I worked on a number of major Hollywood productions. I worked at a celebrity photo agency for quite some time, where I had a stable of photographers that I would send to all the parties and premieres and all the big Hollywood events. And I would also do celebrity photo shoots and put those together as well. So at that time, my life was music, was film, was the whole, going out thing. And, with Hollywood and rock and roll and all that stuff, of course, comes all the other pieces and parts of it, which is the drugs and the alcohol and everything like that, which my first husband was very much into. I never really cared about drugs and alcohol. I didn't even really like to drink. I just did it socially, but bit by bit, these things came in, and one of our drummers ended up bringing heroin in. So we're like, okay, well, we'll try it, because we were just smoking it. You try it once. Yeah, that was pretty cool. That felt good. A month later, try it again. 2 weeks later, try it again. Then next thing you know, you're doing it every week. Then you're doing it twice a week. And that's when you find out, oh, I don't actually have to do it every day to be addicted to it. And the next thing I knew, I couldn't get off of it. Because anyone that's ever been there, it's not like anything else. It's not like an illness where you go up and up and up and you get to the point, and then you finally you've endured it, and then you go down. No, you go up to this incredibly, like, you can't handle it thing, and then you stay there. And I never got to the point where I could handle it long enough. Like about a week was what I could do before I would mentally just start to come unglued because the pain was so bad. And then I would give in. So it took me a very long time to get off of it, understandably. I think there's less than 1% of people that ever actually get off of it. And that's usually because they've come into a situation where they didn't have a choice. So, but for me, what happened was, of course, it's very expensive. And I stopped being able to afford that and a place to live. And since I was the only one working in my relationship, well, we eventually had to give up our place to live and literally move into the car. So there I was living on the streets of Los Angeles, but still working full time in the industry. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. I would have never told anyone in a million years, obviously. But then eventually it got to the point where I just became so sick and I couldn't even keep that up because I couldn't even, keep affording enough for both of us. So I eventually had to stop working and ended up being in like homeless shelters sometimes and stuff like that. And I remember at one point I had been up for a week. I hadn't slept in a week. And I remember a doctor before telling me when I was like, I can't sleep. And they were like, oh, well, after 3 days, you'll go to sleep. The body will just naturally fall asleep. You can't stop it. I'm like, you want to bet? So I was hallucinating. I was in and out of consciousness and stuff. And I'd grown really, really weak by then because we just didn't have any money. We didn't have any money for any kind of regular, decent food. I remember just buying a loaf of bread and some of that horrible little plastic cheese, you'd pull off the plastic wraps on, and we'd maybe get a little mayo on it. And that's what I ate all the time. So my body got weaker and weaker. And I remember the morning that I passed away, they would feed you out oatmeal, like gruel every morning at this homeless shelter I was at for a while. And I remember I couldn't stand up. I couldn't stand up that morning in line trying to get my gruel, and my husband had to hold me up. And that night, sometime during the night, I just went. I left my body, because of the trauma and the starvation and just the extreme, massive pain was just too much for me. And I was gone for reportedly about an hour. And then when I was found, obviously the ambulance and the hospital and all of that stuff. And I couldn't speak for 3 days. And that whole experience is, of course, a whole other video. But when I came back, of course, everyone was really surprised that I came back into my body after being gone for so long. But because unlike, film and television and stuff like that, only about 3 to 4%, I think it is, of people are actually, they're actually able to revive them. So the fact that I came back after that long was kind of a big deal. But when I say that I came back, it's not quite accurate. So let's just say that a bigger part of me came back. Because afterwards, and I know everyone says in near-death experiences that they were different, but I literally wasn't the same person anymore. I didn't want the things I wanted before. I didn't care about doing those things anymore. I wanted something completely different. So I began hearing things. I began knowing things. And I heard this word, and I heard it a couple of times. It was literally like someone with a pair of headphones whispering in my ear. And I was almost like, did I hear that? Did I? Where you're like, wait, I know I heard it, but there's nobody here. And I heard it whispered in my ear, Big Sur, Big Sur. Well, anyone who knows California probably knows that Big Sur is on the central coast of California and it's out in the wilderness. So I was like, well, I'm due if I can get out, because I had started working in another company then. I'm like, I'm going to take a little break here, and I need to go to Big Sur. I need to go and see what's there. And so I took like a week's holiday in the summer at that point to go to Big Sur. And that's when some other things began to happen to me, which we're going to go to right now. So, Big Sur. So Big Sur, like I said, is on the central coast of California. It's out in the wilderness. You always think that if all the gnomes and the fairies went somewhere, well, that's where they would have gone to. Because it's this kind of magical place where there's just these, slopes that go straight down into the ocean. And it just has this beautiful feel to it. Well, then all these things started happening to me there. I began hearing things. I began getting, all these like directions. I remember going to there's a tiny little library there, and I went there, and about the third time I went there, I kept seeing this little DVD on the bottom shelf with this sunflower, and it was pulled out. And every time I went, for some reason, it was like someone had pulled it out. And finally, the third time I got there, I was like, what the heck is that thing? And I looked at it, and it was a video on the Gerson therapy, which is all about juicing and a lot of kind of raw food and eating a certain way. So I began to get into all of that because I watched it, and I'm like, wow, I need this. And so it led me to how to heal my body. So I began to do all of that, all of the juicing, and eventually I became even a full-time raw foodist for a while. Then I began seeing books. All these books that I needed to know, I needed to read, kept coming to me. And this information kept coming to me about stuff that was going to happen on Earth. But I didn't know when. Because when you're getting stuff from out there, there's no time frame because there's no time. So you don't know when you're getting it, you don't know where it fits here. And I'm like, now? Stuff's going to happen now. Like, now? And it's like, no. Like 20, 30, 40 years from now kind of thing. But I'm getting the information then. So after that point, I spending a few years in kind of healing and beginning for all these gifts, and I guess you would call them, I don't know. I didn't see them as gifts. They didn't seem unusual to me. That's when I did a video about this, about the naughty baby technique. And in that video, I talk about when I was in Big Sur and these terrible memories from my life in Los Angeles would come up several times a day and just like annihilate me. And that's when I started being like, no way. I can't think that. I can't think about that. I can't think about that. I'm in this beautiful, gorgeous place and I'm just going to be happy. And like I said in that video, it took me about 2 weeks of doing that. And I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't think about those things anymore. And then one day I literally woke up and I had reprogrammed myself. And I woke up so incredibly happy. And then everyone wanted to be around me. People started giving me gifts. Everyone was inviting me to their parties and their events. And, oh, do you want to go here? Do you want to go there? All of this stuff. I got given 2 cars. It was crazy. It was wild. But like I said, at the time, I had no idea what I was doing because I didn't really know about meditation. I didn't know about anything about manifestation. It wasn't really a thing then, not that I had heard of. So eventually I moved to Santa Cruz, and which is just about a couple hours up the coast from Big Sur. And I began working at a university there, and eventually separated with my husband, which was something that needed to happen. And then I eventually met someone else from the United Kingdom, and all this stuff started to happen. And I remember one day I was sitting there at work at my little computer, and suddenly I was surrounded by this pink and gold light. It was this big bubble around me. And I'm sitting there going, is anybody else seeing this? Like, how come no one's saying anything? And I'm like, just like, I don't know what to do. And finally, I touched it and I ran my finger through it, and it left a trail in it. It was like this shimmering, thick kind of jelly material, but it was real, and it was there for about 20 minutes before I was finally like, I need to go and take a break. And I went and walked around outside for another 15, 20 minutes or so, and it stayed with me the whole time until it finally dissipated. Now, at the time, I thought it was because of this new person I had met. I thought that that was literally their love for me appearing around me, because this person, and the reason I really kind of ended up getting into the relationship in the first place, was because of how psychic they were And I used to think at the time, like, well, psychics, like, more spiritually advanced, right? Yeah, no, was what I had to eventually learn. So I attribute it to them, and eventually I found out it was actually me. It was actually coming from me. So I started going into that relationship. I met the person. I went to the UK, and then I went to the UK twice, and then they came out to California once, and it was at that point that I was like, this just isn't really working, because they were worried all the time. They were worried about this and worried about that. As soon as we kind of got together, then they were freaked out all the time. Like, well, what if we're not going to be together? What if something happens and you can't come over? Or what if this? And I'm just like, whoa, just, take it easy. Let everything just kind of naturally unfold, and things will be fine. It's like he couldn't do it. No matter how much I told him, he couldn't do it. So eventually I literally had to cut him off, because he wouldn't stop. And then when I said, it's not working anymore, I don't want to do this anymore, he still wouldn't stop. So I literally had to unfriend him. Well, this is when some other people came into my life, mysteriously. Suddenly on Facebook, I saw a profile of a girl who seemed just like me. She was a drummer. She loved the same kind of music I love. She loved same kind of motorcycles I loved. She loved animals. In fact, my friends were like, have you made another profile? Is that you? Because there wasn't a picture of her. It was just a picture of her from the waist down, like playing drums. And then when I looked her up, it said, well, she was up the coast in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm like, so I'm finally like, what is going on? And then she started friending all my friends. And I'm like, what's happening here? So I ended up sending her a friend request. But instead of answering my friend request, like accepting it, she just started messaging me. She's like, oh, I see that you sent me a friend request, and that we have same friends, and stuff. And actually, before I had met Mr. N, the guy I had gotten involved with in the United Kingdom that I had to cut off, I'd actually been briefly involved with somebody else who was, interestingly enough, also from the United Kingdom, someone who I had fallen in love with, but it hadn't worked out. She was friends with him. And I'm like, what's going on? Why are you friends with this same guy who's clear over here in London? Like, what is happening? So all this stuff was like, what's going on? So that's why I sent her the friend request. And then she messaged me. We began talking, and she stayed with me for the next 24 hours nonstop. And she's like telling me all these things about myself. And I'm like, wow, you know a lot. And she's like, well, weren't you with this guy, Mr. N, as I will call him? And I'm like, yeah, but it didn't work out. She's like, well, I feel like there was something there. Like, you guys are supposed to be together. Like, there's all these things, like there's things getting in the way, forces coming in that are trying to get, in between you guys. So she started making me wonder. And I was like, well, how do you know all these things? And she's like, I'm a psychic medium. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, you certainly are. And then she's like, I'm really worried about this guy, Mr. N. And I'm like, really? Do you think he's okay? She's like, I don't think he's okay. I don't think he's okay at all. Maybe you should try and get a hold of him. So I was finally like, oh, okay. Well, I sent him a message. Nothing. And she's like, I feel like something bad is happening. Something really bad is happening. And I'm like, God, I'll send him another message. I sent him another message, still no response. And by that time, it was time for me to go home. And when I got home, there was still no response. So I literally called him all the way from California, to the UK. And he didn't answer. And she's like, oh, I don't think this is good. This is bad. This is bad. So I'm like sitting there in a panic, like, oh my God, what's happening? What's happening? And then finally he messages me, and we go on Skype and we start talking. And the whole time she's messaging me. And he's sitting back. I can see him on the couch. He's sitting back. I can see his hands, his arms. So it never dawned on me what was really going on. So, of course, we began speaking again. But that first 24 hours, Gina was with me the entire time. In fact, she stayed for ages and ages and ages. I mean, she was there with me for, I think, the next 6 months, every single day. In the very beginning, she was with me 24/7. She knew what I was thinking. She knew when I was crying. She knew all these things about me that I'd never told anybody. She knew what I dreamed at night. I mean, wow. So, of course, I'm believing what she's telling me. She was there. I could confide in her. I confided in her everything, about how I felt about Mr. N, about the guy that I had been in love with, a bit before him. And I told her everything. I told her it all. And to me, other people might be like, well, what's going on here? But for me, I expected these things. I've always expected these kind of things in life, because to me, it's like, why wouldn't they happen? Because to me, it's like, well, extraordinary things are supposed to happen, and then when I began to talk to Mr. N, he told me that someone had also come in for him on his side to support him, Mr. Light, who is actually someone I knew about from before. I hadn't actually physically met him, but he had spoken about him before. And he said, well, he's come in for me and she's come in for you, because it's so important that we be put back together again, because these evil forces basically have pulled us, apart, to try and keep us away. And then I even got a letter from Mr. Light, sent to me, telling me all about this and how we needed to be together, me and Mr. N and all of that stuff. So, so obviously we started talking, and I'm like, well, wow, if we're supposed to be together and other things have happened that are taking us apart, I'm like, but why does it kind of feel weird a bit? I'm like, well, okay, so we began talking, and then he started being like, okay, he started being okay with me and everything. And that with Mr. Light and Gina, we had all this support and everything, and it was really nice. It was great, and all these things began to happen. So I began to be able to hear him. I could hear him when I would start to go to sleep at night. I could hear him say my name, and it was just like I had a pair of headphones on. And I would just be like, just dropping off, and I'd be like, oh, I heard you. I heard you. I heard you talking to me. So, and then all this other stuff started going on. So one night I remember Gina messaging me and saying, well, I won't be able to be with you, both of you, tonight, because she was always there. We would be talking, Mr. N and I would be talking on Skype, and he'd be sitting back on the couch, like I'd say, with his arms. I could see him, I could see most of his body. And she'd be messaging me and talking in the meantime, but I never saw her. But I could see him, and, so I'd be telling him what she would say and all of this stuff, so we're having this whole conversation. And this went on for months and months. And one night she said, I won't be able to be with you guys watching over you tonight. So Mr. Light is going to be watching over with you. And I'm like, oh, why is that? And she's like, because I'm having some people over tonight, and we are doing something very important. And I'm like, oh, wow. I wish I could be a fly on the wall then, right? So that evening, as usual, I'm talking to Mr. N on Skype, and by that time I've pulled the couch up in front of the computer, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like laying down on it, and it's in the middle of summer. It's like late July, maybe early August or something like that. And well, if you know anything about California, there's no storms. It doesn't rain in the middle of the summer. There's no freaky weather or, stuff like that. At least not that I ever experienced during the summer. It was just dead quiet, warm summer night. I had the glass sliding door open, and you could hear like the crickets, but that was it. Totally quiet other than that. And it's about 10 o'clock at night, and we're sitting there talking. And then suddenly I heard this noise. and it sounded literally like there was a freight train coming. Well, there was no tracks anywhere near where I lived. And I lived on this ridge right above the Pacific Ocean. But I could hear this thing, and as it got closer, and I'm like starting to sit up going and looking, going, what is that? And it sounded like this giant, massive storm where it was literally like that. I'm probably not making a very good sound, but it came up like right outside of my place, right outside of my house, stopped and snapped a big, huge transformer, because they were on these big poles, like telephone poles, this huge transformer. It snapped the pole, knocked it down, all the lights went out, all the power went out, and that sound, that massive sound, stopped dead. Complete silence. So by then, I am obviously like really freaked out. I'm like, what? Oh my God, what was that? What's going on? It's taking all the lights out. What's happening? I grab a piece of my drum kit, and this metal piece of my drum kit, and I'm like going like this, and I finally like go into bed, and I like lay down and stuff. And but all night long, I'm kind of like, going in and out of sleep like this. And so the next day, she's like, well, what happened was that there was this negativity that was attached to both of you, and we made it let go. And you could say that it kind of threw its toys out of the pram, right? So it was upset, so that's why it did this thing. And, so I'm like, wow. There's big stuff, but like I said, to me, that things like this would happen were normal. I'm finally like, yes, I'm in the world that I'm supposed to be in, where extraordinary things, happen and stuff. So within 4 months, I left my good job at the university, sold all my stuff, and moved to the UK to be with him, to marry him. Because I'm like, okay, we're meant to be together, right? And all I cared was that just somebody loved me, that I was ready to dedicate my entire life, to him. But the morning after I arrived, he suddenly didn't want anything to do with me. He was like, I remember we were sitting together on the bed looking at his computer, because I didn't bring a big computer with me. I just brought my phone. And he started like elbowing me away. He's like, you're too close. And I'm like, what's happening? What's going on? And then he began to be controlling who I spoke to, where I worked, what clothes I wore, just on and on and on, began to build up. And so I'm messaging her going, what, Gina, I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? What's happening? She's like, oh, it's just a stressful settling in. It'll all go. It'll be okay. And then after a month where it wasn't okay, she disappeared. And you can imagine, I was completely distraught, and I didn't know what to do. He's like, oh, I'll be okay, but it's just this stuff. And well, I kept trying to convince him, yes, I'll stay. Yes, of course I love you, because he didn't think I loved him. He didn't think that I would stay and all of this stuff. And so I stayed for 5 years trying to prove it. 5 years of my life. And finally, all this stuff with him didn't stop. In fact, one day, and he was always worried about either the car breaking down or the boiler. And of course, for people who are in the States, the boiler is like a hot water heater, basically. And he was constantly like, oh my God, what's that sound? Is it okay? What about this? And also in the UK, we've got washing machines in the kitchen in most places. And there will be like a hose, typically, that will go into the sink. And he was always worried about that hose coming out and getting water everywhere. Well, one day we'd gone out to run an errand after putting a load of laundry in, and we came back, and indeed, it actually had happened. So the first thing I did was I just grabbed a bunch of towels and just started sopping everything up. And then out of the corner of my eye, he's against the wall back there, I heard him say, you killed me. And I looked over, and he was pointing straight at me, shaking with his eyes just wide open. He's standing there like this, with his finger pointing at me and shaking at me, and he doesn't look like him. And I just stop. I drop everything. I turn to him and I'm like, who are you? And he just broke. He just suddenly burst into tears and completely changed back to him. And I'm like, okay, what is going on here? That's when I contacted my own psychic. So, and I'd never contacted a psychic before ever, but I knew I had to do something. So I literally went on Etsy, I looked up somebody, and I'm just like, there's all these psychics there. And I was literally like, that one. So I wrote her and I told her some of what was going on. And she's like, okay. As I'm reading what you write, she's like, I'm getting all these pictures. So I want you to go ahead and tell me the whole thing. Tell me what's happened. Tell me what's going on. So I wrote her out like basically all these things that had happened to me over the last, 5-6 years. So she wrote me back a big long email and she's like, all right, first of all, if I'm wrong about any of this, I'm going to really apologize, but this is truly the scene I saw. But if you've met Gina in person, you talked to her on the phone, or you've met Mr. Light, then, and you know these people or something, then, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you what I saw. She's like, it's true. Mr. N is extremely psychic because these people are him. They're actually other parts of him, things that he has brought in to control the situation. Because she's like, he's never been that strong, and he brought these things in at an early age because his father was very abusive, and so he saw these energies as being protective. But she's like, they're actually primal earth force energies. So there are lower density energies that exist in places of fear. And she's like, they're very powerful. Sure, absolutely. She's like, this is where kind of voodoo and other things like that come from, where people want to control. They're still in a state of mind where they want to control. They want to, get people's powers because they don't feel like they've got any of their own, right? So she's like, yeah, I believe that this is all him. I don't know how he's done it. She's like, but this is all him. He is what we call a shadow master. And within 2 weeks, I was gone. As fast as I could arrange another place, I had to leave during the middle of the day while he was at work because otherwise he wouldn't let me out the door, because I tried to leave a few times before when he was there, and he wouldn't let me leave. So I'd had a day off when he was working a day, so I took that day and I left. And I moved in with a friend of mine who thankfully let me move in with her. But then he began coming into my dreams. And he started using the cat that we had. It wasn't actually our cat. It was like a neighbor's cat, but the cat thought he was our cat. The cat lived with us and stuff. And he knew how much I loved that cat. And that was one of the things that was hard for me to leave, was because I really love the cat. And I just had this feeling, I'm like, if I leave, the cat's going to die. I just knew, I'm like, if this cat stays in this energy with him, the cat's not going to make it, because I knew that I wasn't going to make it. And that's why I had to leave, because I at that point, I knew I felt broken, and I knew I had to leave. So he was coming into my dreams, and he was using the cat as I would see the cat outside of the where I was at, and I could see the cat wanting to come in, and it was dragging its back legs, behind it, as if it had been its spine had been broken or something like that. And so when I'd wake up, I'd be like, he's using the cat to try and get me to come back. Look what you're doing to the cat or something. And so I got rosemary, and I put these big pieces of rosemary by my windows, by my door, my bedroom door, and under my pillow, and all of that immediately stopped. Thank goodness. Because so I was in this place of despondency, for a long time, because I was like, how could this have happened? And I think a lot of people may think well, you were just gullible and stuff. But when you have the things that happened, like the big storm coming up and pulling out all the lights, cutting off all the electricity, coming out of nowhere, hearing voices, hearing all this stuff, having all these things happen. But more than anything, the fact that when I was speaking to him, when I was still in California, and I was speaking to him, and he's on the couch, and I could see him, like talking, I could see him sitting back. Well, at the same time, Gina would be writing to me, because I'd have the Skype up, and I'd have him on screen, and I'd have my messenger up, and I could see her messages coming in. But he wasn't typing. Pretty good, huh? Yeah. Took me a long time to figure out, that's some high-level psychic ability stuff, Unfortunately, he wasn't in control of it, which is great when you are, but when you aren't. So it doesn't matter what abilities, obviously, you have. If you're in a low mental, fearful place, they're going to rule you instead of you ruling them. So, these are big things, these kind of things that happen. And what's interesting is the whole time I had been in the UK, I kept expecting, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to meet somebody. I'm going to meet somebody, and they're going to know exactly who I am. They're going to take one look at me and know exactly who I am. I mean, who I am, truly, like way beyond this earth experience. And little did I realize it would take about 8 years. 8 years for that to happen. Because once again, I knew the information was coming in, but I didn't know where it fit. And that was when, and this was probably about 5 years, maybe 4.5, 5 years after I left Mr. N, that I met Mr. T. And Mr. T and I weren't involved in that kind of way. He is what, to me, was the most extraordinary person I'd ever met. And I would venture to say possibly even on the planet, But that's when I began to get more validation, more understanding. He taught me about all the levels of the heavens, the dimensions, levels of consciousness, so many things that I could never fit into. Like, that's gonna have to be a whole video on its own. But I wanted to share all these things, not only to tell my story, but to kind of let people know that, extraordinary things are out there. Extraordinary things do happen. All of us have extraordinary abilities, where we can travel through dimensions, where we can travel through time. We can bring things to this physical realm and go to other places ourselves. These things do happen. Extraordinary things are a part of this world, and they're a part of you too. And this is why I like to bring this information out, because I want people to understand that reality is not what we think it is, not by a long shot. That all those things that you think about in yourself, that, wow, these things, extraordinary things should exist. I should be able to wave my wand and magic happens. Well, those things are real. It's just that we're so in this, what we think is reality, that we dismiss those things, or we allow other people to dismiss those things from our minds, and we get rid of them, and we think, oh, I guess it's not real after all. Well, there's nothing you can think of that can't be real. So I hope you have enjoyed that so far. I will, in the future here, I'll make another video about some other extraordinary things that have happened to me, which obviously this video has gotten long enough. I've had to put it together. So, it's going to be cool. And if you guys have extraordinary experiences, go ahead and put those in the comments, because I think it's really good for people to know these things, But of course, as always, I am your host, Sky Cheyenne, and thank you for being here once again with me on Rebuild Reality. Thank you for your likes, your shares, your comments, and most of all, of course, your subscription. If you are subscribing to my channel, thank you